Hey everybody, what's up? Hope you guys are doing good today. Just taking a quick break from these Fish the Moment lake map breakdowns I'm doing right now to do today's YouTube tip. And today I want to talk a little bit about something that's coming up around the corner, and that is sort of some tips, suggestions, and I want to give you guys a foundation to catch the really giant bass in the pre-spawn. You know, there's three things that I've sort of identified from fishing over the years that really, play a big part into catching these really big ones more than anything else. And I'm going to share that with you guys today. And first of all, if I look back over the course of my whole fishing time that I've been fishing, I'm going to guess that probably at least 75% of the really big bass I've caught, when I talk about a big bass, I'm talking over 7 pounds. 75% of these fish came during the pre-spawn, usually when that water temperature is, between 50 and 58 degrees, or maybe upper 40s to upper 50s in that range, pre-spawn. And that varies around the country depending upon where you're at. It can be anywhere between January to May, depending upon what part of the country you're in. But normally, the reason this is so good is this is the time of year when you have the biggest group or the biggest numbers of big fish are in that shallow water. It's like, I think a lot of those big fish throughout the course of the year, in the winter and the summertime, they tend to roam a lot. They tend to get rogue, just be by themselves, suspend out over deep water, get really difficult to catch. But in the pre-spawn, this is the time of year they get catchable, and that's why they get caught more. So anyway, I've sort of identified 3 different things that you need to remember if you want to catch your biggest bass of a lifetime or fish over 7 pounds. So I'm sort of going to go over 3, 2, 1. The first thing that you got to remember, which is the third most important thing, is the type of areas that you're fishing. And if you're going to catch big bass, you got to fish where these big bass reside at, as far as the structure in the lake that you're fishing. And while you can catch an occasional big one, about anywhere, there's certain things that you want to look for wherever you're fishing. And it doesn't matter if you're fishing, a natural lake, a grass lake, a man-made impoundment, whatever. First thing you have to do is you have to be able to identify the staging areas for these big bass. And the staging areas are these places that the big bass will go to once that water temperature starts warming up and once the daylight hours starting to get longer. And normally what they are, they're deep water that is fairly close to shallow water or closer to spawning type areas. So the transition and the staging areas that I'm going to look for are the places that a little bit steeper, a little bit deeper, but they've got something close by. And I don't mean like 100 yards away. I'm talking like maybe even a quarter of a mile away, something fairly close by that is going to give those bass some good spawning habitat. For example, in a typical man-made impoundment where you have some type of rock structures, whether it be boulders, chunk rock, basketball, gravel, whatever, it could be like a channel swing bank next to a point. It could be a main lake bluff next to that gradually had a rock transition into a flatter area. Anywhere where you have deep water that hits the bank and you've got some shallower flat areas next to that. Probably the number one area, pre-spawn area in a man-made lake, is if you have some type of a secondary point that has deep water, that secondary point goes back into, it leads back into a flatter cove. So maybe the secondary point would be like the last deep water area before the cove flattens out. Those type of places are magnets. Like I said, channel swing banks, bluff ends, those are the type of areas that you're going to catch your giant bass in a man-made lake. If you're fishing a lake that has a lot of grass in it, TVA lakes, Texas lake, Florida lakes, that type of stuff, that's when you need to concentrate on some type of an edge and ditch combination. Most all the big giant bass I've caught in those type of areas, which has been quite a few of them, have been where the grass comes close to some type of a ditch that runs through a flat, a secondary creek channel, a main river channel, or a hard edge in the grass. So it's sort of the same thing in a grass lake. You want to have shallow areas that are closer to deep water. These are the type of areas that these big ones will pull up into. and set up on. And they use the same type of stuff. They can use secondary grass points the same way that rocky lakes use the secondary rocky points on there. So first thing to remember, number 3, is look for those staging areas. The second most important thing is your lure selection. Once you do identify the staging areas, you have to be able to key in on the bait that's going to produce those bigger fish. And the old saying that big lures produce big bass is true. That's a true statement. And that's more important in the pre-spawn than any other time of the year, because and if you've watched some of my past videos, you always know that I talk about this, is in the pre-spawn of the year, that's when the forage usually is its biggest size. The crawfish are big, bait fish are big, gizzard, shad, whatever, perch, they're all big that time of year. So that's when you need to upgrade your size of your bait. So what we're talking about, your best lures for the pre-spawn of the year are going to be like your big swim baits, your Alabama rigs, your big jerk baits, and your big spinner baits, and maybe like a full-size jig. Big lures. So that time of year, like I said, my favorite ones, I like to use a lot of like 5-inch paddle tail swim baits. I use a lot of big spinner baits, like 3/4 ounce spinner baits with number 7, number 8 willow leaf blades on it. Alabama rigs with like 3.5, 4-inch, swim baits on the Alabama rig. And a big full-size jig, like a 1/2 ounce jig with a thick skirt and a big trailer on it. So something that puts out a big profile. And the big jerk bait. That time of year I use a lot, like the Megabass Edo Shiner, 110 Magnum, LBO 100, all the bigger size jerk baits are going to catch the bigger fish. So that's the second most important thing. Use those big baits in the pre-spawn. But the most important thing to catching giant bass in the pre-spawn, 7-pound plus bass, is you simply have to fish those type of lakes that have those kind of fish in them. Because if you notice, a lot of the guys that catch a lot of big fish, you hear these guys catching big ones, they're fishing for the most part in Texas, Florida, California, and maybe an oddball lake like Chickamauga, something like that. Your odds will go up dramatically if you fish areas that have big fish in them. But if you're fishing a body of water, say for example like here in Table Rock in Missouri, Table Rock used to have a lot of big bass, but it doesn't anymore. 5 or 6 pounder is a big one at Table Rock now. If you fish some lakes, back east, fish if you fish Lake Cumberland, Lake Douglas, Fort Loudon, Lake Norman, Lake Murray, that type of stuff, your typical lakes in there. Anymore, a 7-pound bass is a rare fish for those type of waters. I mean, if you catch one, it's rare. So the most important tip that I can give you for catching a 7-pound plus bass is fish those lakes where those big ones live at, which doesn't help you out a whole lot if you don't live around those areas, but that's probably the most important thing. But anyway, just to reiterate, pre-spawn's the best time of year to catch the biggest bass of your life. It's the best odds you have of catching a 7-pound plus bass anywhere you live. Not to say they don't live everywhere, because they live all over. Every state in the United States, almost in the continental United States, has a 7-pound bass in it. So if you fish those lakes that don't have a lot of 7-pounders in it, concentrate, just like what I talked about, on the second, third aspect. Identify those staging areas that are in the area that you're fishing, which is a combination of deep water, close water access, shallow water access next to each other, and fish those lures that produce those bigger bass, those bigger lures. Big lures in staging areas on lakes that have a lot of big fish, your odds go way through the roof of catching a 7-pounder. But it's really odd because, big fish, they're just not around like they used to be. I mean, back 40, 50 years ago when I started out, there were a lot of big fish around the country. 7-pound bass were not that uncommon, but the more fishing pressure that we get, the more lakes that the more that a lake matures and goes through a cycle, you have just less and less. It's harder to catch those big ones. And a lot of the lakes in the United States were built back in the, anywhere between the 40s to the 1960s. And those lakes have cycled through where they simply just don't sustain the big ones like they used to. And then you put that on top of fishing pressure, high level fishing pressure, electronic technology, And a lot of people eating those bass and taking those gene pools out of the lakes through mounting them or eating them or whatever. It's just not that easy to catch big ones anymore. So anyway, that's my tips for it. Hope that helped you out a little bit. Like I said, those are the three things that I've identified that have put more 7-pounders in the boat for me than anything else, and I think it'll work for you also. So anyway, hope you guys have a good day, and we'll check in tomorrow with another tip. See y'all.